Joining us this morning. And with us, we have Dan Kerr. He's the president of Burns Mechanical. Thank you, Dan. Dan is going to be talking to us about operational changes that can be made in buildings to improve energy efficiency and also look at how you can improve indoor air quality. Marcelo Rocco is the founder, CEO, and president of Ecosave, and he's going to be talking about some of the capital improvements that can be made in buildings also to address energy efficiency and overall building wellness and health. And Sam El-Barouki, I'm sorry, Sam, I forgot to ask you how to pronounce your name. You'll correct me when you get on. And he is a senior VP for Dividend Finance. And he is a CPACE lender, and you'll be hearing a lot more about CPACE in just a moment. And my name is Lisa Shulock. I'm the interim program manager for CPACE at the Philadelphia Energy Authority. So, as I said, I'm with the Philadelphia Energy Authority, and we have been, we are the administrator for CPACE for the city of Philadelphia, and the PEA has been around for about 10 years, and our goals are to use energy, clean energy development as a tool for job creation, improving public health, reducing carbon, and economic development. So before we dive deep into our topic, I just want to make sure that we everybody understands what CPACE is. First of all, it stands for Commercial Property Assessed Clean Energy, and CPACE is the acronym that's used. Or you might also hear of PACE, which also encompasses residential as well. But we in Philadelphia and in Pennsylvania have commercial CPACE exclusively. It's a financing tool, and you'll be hearing a lot from Sam about how it works. The financing is to help make sure that there are measurable energy and/or water savings in your project, and it's done through a special assessment. It's not a property tax. It's similar to one, and you also don't need to pay tax. You could be a nonprofit and not pay property taxes and still be able to take advantage of CPACE. So that's a very high overview. Sam will go in a lot more detail. And before I introduce to you Dan, I just wanted to say I'm really appreciative of Dan and Sam and Marcelo sharing their time with us this morning. And I do want to point out that there are many different qualified engineering firms that can be used to manage a CPACE project, and as well as many different capital providers. So you're seeing a representative sample here of some of them, but if you do end up wanting to take on a CPACE project, you are not limited to the folks that are here today, but we are very, again, appreciative of them sharing their wisdom. So I'm going to now let Dan Kerr take over and talk about operations.
Thanks, Lisa. You can go to that first slide. So what I thought I'd share in the limited time we have this morning is, kind of what we've learned by being engineers, contractors, builders, maintenance providers, and also being involved with guaranteed energy savings projects. I've been doing this for 30 years, and we've learned a lot of things along the way. And of course, in the COVID era, our phone has been ringing off the hook about, what do we do? What can we do? What should we be doing? And so the first thing we always start with is, everybody take a breath and pause and use common sense. There's no substitute for common sense. You aren't going to HVAC your way out of good common sense practicing, social distancing, wearing masks, those sorts of things. And so that is number one on the list. And so if you're going to bring people into your buildings, you do have to take some operational adjustments. or at least manage your operations in a certain way. But our kind of overwhelming advice has been, and this might offend some product vendors that are on the telephone today, but we do not recommend starting with a gadget, and pointing at a gadget and saying, whatever it might be, a product, and saying, this is what we're doing about COVID. It might feel good. It might feel good to the occupants of your building, but you need to start with the fundamentals. And so case in point, advancing to the next slide, you can't assume that your building is working correctly in the first place. If there's one thing that we've learned through years of maintaining and engineering buildings and improving energy results and operational results, is that, a majority of buildings, more than half, there are statistical studies that show 80% of buildings aren't operating the way they were originally intended. And so what the pandemic is proving out is that, people that have deferred maintenance on their buildings are, maybe suffering more consequences than others. So a case in point here, I don't expect you to necessarily be able to read the chart real well, but the chart on the left is showing a building. This is actually a school that is improperly ventilated, where we're getting carbon dioxide built up in a classroom far beyond what's normal, and it's a sign of what we validate is there's not enough ventilation air being brought into the building, as opposed to the chart on the right that does show a properly ventilated school building, what we did to mitigate the problem for them. And things like deferred maintenance on filtration, major equipment, outside ventilation air we're finding to be a very significant issue. And so with our own building, we even re-baselined to make sure that we're properly ventilating for our own employees as they come back. So step number one would be, and that we're counseling people, is let's take a good hard look at what you have to begin with, and begin there. So a bit the building, unfortunately, like the school building that you see here, they wanted to know the energy impacts. Could we reduce energy use and take care of our COVID mitigation and keep the teachers union happy? And the answer is, well, no, those are somewhat mutually exclusive goals. And unfortunately, ventilation air is probably the number one driver of energy use. This school would see a pretty significant energy increase simply by getting the outside air back to where it needs to be in this building, to the tune of 15 to 30% probably increased energy use. So I guess the message of this slide is it's a bad time to be dealing with deferred maintenance, but that's a large part of what we've been doing over the past 6 months or so. So next slide. So there are many times, once we've been able to get buildings re-baseline, proving that they're doing the fundamentals properly in their building, providing ASHRAE recommended ventilation air, they're filtering their air properly, those sorts of things. What we've been leaning on first are the time-proven strategies, the one where there's a good statistical database, a lot of scientific evidence that yes, these do help with the current situation of virus buildup and other things in buildings. And those would be ventilation, filtration, and UVGI light, UVC spectrum light to kill germs in the buildings. We're getting a lot of questions about, should we provide more ventilation, or should we extend the time that we're ventilating buildings? Certainly our advice has been, it can't hurt to extend the time of ventilation. If you're typically occupied from 7 a.m. to 5 p.m., for instance, certainly flushing the building before and after occupancy isn't a bad idea, but there is really no statistical evidence that's making much difference. We're advising against, unless it's well engineered, unless it's really thoroughly investigated, we're advising against boosting outside ventilation air onto systems that are pre-existing, because that's, you know, a case where the cure might be worse than the disease itself. You know, if you want to introduce moisture problems in the building, which leads to a whole host of other problems, the number one recipe is to increase the outside air beyond what the equipment can handle. And so we're advising against that, against, you know, some clients that really want to do this. So, you know, what we've been saying about ASHRAE standards is they are scientifically based. We have a lot of clients that want to increase ventilation air beyond ASHRAE standards on existing systems. They are scientifically based. They're based on diluting contaminants in the building, which would include a coronavirus, you know, particle. And so, you know, we believe that getting to the ASHRAE baseline is a good idea. We have clients now that are designing new buildings. They want to have pandemic modes where they press a button and the building gets super flushed, almost as if it's an outdoor situation. Obviously, very, very significant energy ramifications for modes like that. And, you know, it might be a good time if you're designing a new building to take the lead points for providing 30% more ventilation air than what ASHRAE standards recommend. But I have to say, you know, you can read, if you want to find an opinion, you can find it out there. You know, I find very good engineers that say, absolutely, you know, bring more ventilation air in and extend the time of the ventilation air in your buildings. And you can find equally well-respected engineers that say, no, you know, maybe you ought to keep it buttoned up and provide the ASHRAE recommended. So, you know, every building is unique. There are no two that are completely alike. And so unfortunately the answer is, you know, it depends. You know, I'm an engineer, so that's my answer to everything, how we want to do that. Max your MERV is a point. You know, filters in buildings and HVAC systems are based on MERV ratings, and MERV 13, 14, and above are known to be able to filter out viruses. And so we're taking a lot of MERV 8 filters in buildings, which are fairly standard, and replacing them with MERV 13 or MERV 14. Very broad topic to discuss in a very short amount of time, but so the higher your MERV rating, the better. You're gonna have more pressure drop across higher rated filters, and so there's going to be an energy consequence if you have large built-up air handling systems, such as in a hospital or areas or buildings like that. Your fans can probably withstand that additional pressure, but if you have terminal units like fan coil units or water source heat pumps, you really need to consider the increased pressure drop, and you might be inducing operational issues. And finally, UVGI is a technology we've been using for many years, particularly in hospitals. There's a photo there of a coil where we're disinfecting the coil. It does kill contaminant in the air, though it's not as effective as killing contaminants on surfaces. We also put them in ducts in a parallel arrangement. We're doing that. Right now, filters and UVGI lights are very expensive, and they take a very long time to get delivered. There are a lot of new technologies out there. I don't want to go into details in them. You know, bipolar ionization, you can see on the left there is a system called Enverid, a form of sorption filtration that's used in submarines, for instance. We are implementing a lot of technologies like these in buildings, but I have to say that I don't think we're unique in that it's new enough that we really don't have substantial results from these types of setups. You know, in hospitals, we're providing some, you know, some systems that chemically react with the air to kill virus and to kill bacteria. But the jury is still out. And I can tell you, anytime that we do implement systems like this in buildings, we want to make sure that they're doing the blocking and tackling fundamentally sound, that they're doing what they need to do there. So generally, these systems don't use a tremendous amount of energy. I'd say overall, if you have a building that's properly maintained, bringing in ventilation air properly, you're talking about maybe a couple of percentage points increase in energy use into your building by doing COVID-19 measures. If you have an improperly commissioned building, though, it could be very substantial, 20 to 30% sort of a thing. So I think I probably overran my time there. So I'm going to go ahead and.
Dan, just a really quick question that came up. What is the ASHRAE standard that you were referencing around ventilation?
Well, the ASHRAE standard for ventilation is standard 62. I forget the current edition, which year it is, but it's ASHRAE standard 62. And then there are, if you go to ASHRAE's website, they do have COVID operational practices and recommendations. And I'm a big ASHRAE guy. I used to serve nationally with it, and it's a consensus-based body. There are a lot of minds in the room, and ASHRAE is what is used by code officials, and it's worked into our building codes for ventilation, air, and energy use. The ASHRAE standard 90 is the energy code fundamentally that's codified into the codes. So.
Great, thanks, Dan. Mm-hmm. And I just want to say, please use the Q&A feature on the webinar to ask your questions, and we will definitely be able to get to all of them. We've made sure that we've left enough time to have some good dialogue before the hour is out. And now Marcelo Rocco is going to speak.
Thank you. Can you see my PowerPoint?
Yep.
Great. Thank you, Dan. I thought that what Dan presented was very technically sound, very, very enlightening for people to understand that we do need COVID mitigation measures. And as Dan mentioned, you can actually count properly maintain your building as a COVID mitigation measure, so that we're doing what's technically sound. And what we also heard from them there is that any kind of COVID mitigation measure, whether it's properly maintained building or not, so will have some kind of impact on the energy. I think I just lost my PowerPoint.
You did stop sharing.
Thank you. Back on track. So, why would you want to consider doing energy saving measures at the same time that you're actually doing COVID mitigation measures? So, we heard from them that whether it's a little bit more energy or a lot more energy, you will consume more energy when you're implementing COVID mitigation measures. So if we are looking at it in conjunction with other energy saving measures, then you can still end up with the best of both worlds of a building that's healthier, that has implemented COVID mitigation measures, that maybe does have somewhat more energy consumption because of the COVID mitigation measures, but that we find enough other energy reduction measures in the building so that the net effect is that we still have a building that consumes less energy while still having implemented the COVID mitigation measures. So that's something that Ecosave is doing a lot of at the moment. You can combine energy efficiency and COVID mitigation, and that's the ideal world scenario, in that you are still using less energy while you are making your building healthier. And what that does on a financial level is that rather than having a cost increase to the building for addressing COVID, when you do them together, then you have a cost reduction. Your operating expenses are dropping. And we typically see, even when combining with COVID mitigation measures, that we can achieve a 25 to 50% reduction in energy consumption in the building by combining energy efficiency with COVID mitigations. And that obviously leaves a lot of dollars available, that regardless of the financial structure that you end up using, and we're going to be talking about PACE in a bit more detail in a moment, that those savings are now then funding the COVID mitigation, as well as funding whatever improvements and upgrades we did to the building in order to have a more energy efficient building. Funding them together is a way that you don't have to come out of pocket for COVID mitigation measures. And one of the, I'm only going to go into just one point on the PACE. An element of PACE is that in order to be able to use it, there has to be utility savings. There has to be energy or water savings. So you could not use PACE, which is a great program to fund upgrades in buildings. You could not use PACE to do COVID mitigation by itself. But you can use PACE to do COVID mitigation if it's combined with enough energy efficiency measures that the savings from the energy efficiency still net a building that is consuming less than it did before. So, PACE is, we're going to hear more about it from Sam later, but it's a great program to fund building upgrades, and COVID mitigation is not always, cheap to implement. So being able to use PACE allows you not to come out of pocket for COVID mitigation measures when you combine it with the energy efficiency upgrades. We do offer a free of charge in-depth study of savings in a building and COVID mitigation measures. And that's really what we recommend. Whoever you use to do this should be looking at both in conjunction. A lot of the times, improving the maintenance issues that Ben was referring to, can be bundled into the energy efficiency upgrades, whether it's end of life HVAC equipment, whether it's controls that no longer work and need to be improved, or whatever are the issues that mean that most buildings are not working properly. Many of them are deferred maintenance and need to be caught up on. Deferred maintenance is deferred maintenance typically because organizations don't have the funds or the resources to be able to properly maintain their buildings. So when you do a combined COVID mitigation and energy efficiency upgrade, it's a good time to use it as a catch-up and bundle into the project upgrade, bringing the building up to par as to where it needs to be with its deferred maintenance issues. And that might mean replacing end-of-life equipment. That might mean just optimizing and cleaning and recommissioning things. Whatever it might be, it can all be bundled together into one project. And from the point of view of making things easier for organizations, if you can find an organization out there that's capable of designing and engineering the upgrades, implementing it, giving you a performance guarantee, whether that means savings guarantees or other types of performance guarantees, and can do the PACE for you and do it only one, that's going to save you the headaches of having to deal with different organizations that do different pieces of that puzzle. So as you are out there looking for partners, we suggest that you pick somebody that can do it all and can handhold you through the whole process to reduce stress. So thank you. That's my piece for today.
All right, can you see my screen?
Yes.
All right. Thank you, Marcelo, for that. So just for disclosure, I'm going to be going over high-level CPACE program, just the constraints of CPACE in general. But there are, as Lisa mentioned, other capital providers out there, and depending on the state, different variations of allowable loan to value or different underwriting guidelines. So I'll be covering mostly what Dividend has, but Also just general parameters. So as you can see on this slide right here on the left-hand side, from a building upgrade perspective, one of the nice caveats of PACE is the fact that we can finance, 100%, generally 100% of the cost upgrades. Times you could potentially, pass that cost on down as well, depending on the structure that you have or the asset class and the tenant structure that you may have. Of course, encourages sustainability, resiliency, and PACE is a non-recourse product that many owners and sponsors, it appeals to many owners and sponsors. On the right-hand side, from a new construction, I just wanted to add this illustration here because the last 4 years, PACE has definitely become much more popular because of the new construction piece of fitting into the capital stack. But as you could see, on the left there, on the illustration on the right, but the left segment there, you have your equity of 10%, and then general, conventional financing, you have to find some kind of mezzanine or high cost, funds, throw in a little bit of maybe some historical tax credits, and then your first senior debt. You could have a weighted average cost of capital on the bottom, as you could see, of 9.29%. Where we come into play is we try to mitigate or minimize mezzanine debt or other high cost, funds. We place that, which could significantly, decrease the weighted average cost of capital, to, in this illustration, 6.59%. CPACE, is able to integrate with, many different economic development initiatives. Opportunity zones has been a big one the last couple of years. If there's a project in opportunity zone, we are fairly agnostic as a CPACE industry. If there are TIFs involved or, low-income housing credits or other type of utility incentives, PACE for the most part can fit in. We are nimble and flexible, so it's just a matter of making sure that everyone gets on the same page. But that certainly helps, especially when it comes to the new construction component. So this slide here just goes over high level on the left-hand side of some energy conservative measures. Again, this is general, PACE items that we can finance, dependent on state or jurisdiction. But as you can see, I'm not going to go over all those on the left, but as you go down a little bit lower, on that graph, there are state-specific measures, such as in California, you can throw in some seismic related items, and in Florida, you can throw in some storm resiliency as well. But the remainder there, for the most part, Pennsylvania and Philadelphia, those items are allowable. And then the right-hand side, from financing terms and so forth. So with dividend, we generally finance the lower of 20% as completed value, or 25% of LTC. In Pennsylvania, as long as you don't hit a max threshold of over 95% combined, then PACE is allowable. Minimum project size of $100,000 for Philadelphia and $25,000 for PA. The terms are generally long-term. Most generally from 20 to 30 years. Really, again, it's very state specific as far as how to calculate that, whether it's a, cost weighted average, of the actual utility, the life of the utilities that you're, or items that you're actually upgrading. Interest rate is fixed, self-amortizing as well. The costs dependent on the capital provider, right? And then of course, different variables such as asset class, geography. From a guarantee perspective, PACE is non-recourse, which is nice. Prepayment, there are, because this is a long-term loan financing tool in nature, it usually comes standard with some type of prepayment structure. This can be bought out or bought down, depending, right, on the capital provider. Sometimes if you want to move up an interest rate a little bit, to go down and the prepayment structure, or buy it out completely, that is feasible. Really depends on the exit structure of that actual owner and project. And then the repayment frequency is generally concurrent with the property tax payments. So, when it comes to the PACE or CPACE discussion, the elephant in the room generally is first lender consent, right? So, because we are a tax assessment, fairly, I could say almost pari passu with Uncle Sam on the taxes there. PACE does prime, the other loans. We are ahead of them, we're ahead of the first, you can say, any seconds, any mezz, and so forth. So to get the buy-in for the first, mortgage lender or construction lender, it's not just, hey, can we add PACE and send them a package? It does require a little bit more work than that. But some of the things or items that we boast about when we do speak to the lenders, as you can see, is of course lowering the weighted average cost of capital, right? The fact that it is assumable as well, that it can help align and pay for items related to being LEED certified, which is a big one. I would say the most important facet when it comes to obtaining first lender consent is the fact that we don't accelerate in the event of default. So really what that means is in the event of borrower default, PACE is not going to ask the first lender to pay us off for the remainder 27 years. As long as whatever's on that tax bill is cured that year, then PACE is okay. So that allows these lenders to really assess their exposure, right? And either create maybe a bucket for 2 or 3 years, an extra reserve bucket or debt service coverage bucket as well, in the event of default, to cover both, potentially both, first and PACE payments. So that point of the fact that we don't accelerate, foreclosure is really a really important one that many lenders are not aware of, and that does require education. This is a map of where CPACE is actually approved. As you can see, there's 23 states and growing that are operational. And then there's several states that are launching there in the green. This does not mean that the entire state is PACE approved, as many of you guys know. It has to be passed and approved by the state legislators, but then it has to be adopted by either the county or the city, respectively. It's that could be a frustration at times for many owners, whereas, oh well, PACE is approved in Pennsylvania, but they're in a county that may not necessarily haven't adopted it yet. Again, I'm hopeful in the next 5 years or so, all the states here will be in blue, and the majority of the counties or cities will also have adopted the PACE program. Just a couple of examples or case studies in California that we have. Dividend Finance is headquartered in California. This is multifamily, but you can see here that this was a solar project, 20-year PACE term, which actually was paired with HUD, which is actually a big deal. Project results in over $5.8 million in energy savings over 25 years. Savings to investment ratio, SIR, 2.11, which is a solid number to be at. And the first HUD property to use PACE actually and to convert to solar. And a couple of other examples here just to showcase the fact that PACE is fairly agnostic to asset class, except right now in Pennsylvania, multifamily is not allowable, but I know we're all working on that collectively and lobbying efforts to get that approved in the near term. But here you can see in Chico, California, the mall, you know, it was LED lights and building controls upgrades. You could also, you know, see the SIR there of also over 2, and the cumulative savings of over, you know, almost close to $3 million. And the right-hand side, it was a brewery in Anaheim, California, and the 25-year term, you know, with about $1 million in PACE. I did forget to mention that in general, you know, cost of funds for PACE, again, depending on capital provider, right? Anywhere from, could be anywhere from high 4s to the mid 6s, you know, in regards to interest rate. Again, depends on a slew of different variables, but in general, cost of funds are very affordable when you compare it to other forms of capital. So, Lisa, I think it is back to you.
Thank you so much, Sam, Dan, Marcelo. I see some great questions coming in the Q&A. Please keep them coming. I'm going to speak for a few minutes, and then we're gonna start addressing your questions. So let me just quick share my screen here. Hold on 1 second. Sorry about that. All right, here we go. Okay, so Sam pretty much covered this. I just wanted to make sure that for the program that we're speaking about, that I'm speaking about today, is CPACE in Philadelphia. So PEA manages just the Philadelphia program. In the other counties in Pennsylvania, there are other program administrators. Most of them are being managed by the Sustainable Energy Fund. And there are several counties around here that are up and running, and several more that are in progress. In total, there are 8 active programs in Pennsylvania, and 5 more are on their way to becoming active. As Sam mentioned, right now in Pennsylvania, it's only commercial and industrial. We are working to try to expand to include multifamily buildings as well. We're also looking at, while we're advocating for amending the legislation, to see if we can add some indoor air quality allowable measures so that we could expand beyond energy efficiency. But for right now, that's not allowed. And we're also looking to see if we can expand to include some stormwater management, in particular green stormwater management, but again, not allowed right at this moment. And it can be for building upgrades, as well as gut rehab and new construction. And for the existing buildings, the energy efficiency improvement your building just has to become more energy efficient than it is today. And for new construction, you have to exceed the energy code that's in place. We talked about the $100,000 minimum in Philadelphia, in Pennsylvania. I'm sorry, in Philadelphia. In Pennsylvania, it's actually lower, up to 30-year terms. We have a registry of capital providers that have registered and been approved in Pennsylvania, and other capital providers can easily be added to that list. And I should also mention that retroactive financing is available. So for a project, either a new construction or a major building systems upgrade that has taken place in the last 2 years, there's opportunity for retroactive financing. In fact, if all goes well, fingers crossed, we're going to have a retroactive financing project close this week in Philadelphia that we'll be letting people know about as soon as it's public. I want to talk very briefly about the first project that we closed in Philadelphia, which also was the first in Pennsylvania. It was a project in the Harrogate Kensington neighborhood. It's a gut rehab mixed use facility, why this is interesting and why I wanted to mention it is that for buildings that have both commercial space and residential space, you can condo off the commercial space and get CPACE financing to support the energy efficiency and water conservation. And if there's renewable solar energy, you can portion it off and get funding for the commercial piece. And that's exactly what these developers did. Shift Capital is developing this facility in Kensington and received funding from Twain Financial to do this project. It's very exciting. It was a $1.5 million financing, and as Sam was mentioning earlier, it did kind of fill in that capital stack where there was a gap. They needed some lower cost funding than they would find either by bringing in more equity or finding other mezzanine debt, and they were able to make it affordable to be highly energy efficient. So now we're going to move to the Q&A portion of our program, and we have some great questions that have come in. And I see in looking at the participants that we have a nice range of people who I think are very knowledgeable about the financing end of things, and others who are very knowledgeable about building engineering and energy efficiency. So we have some questions from one end or another that may not be familiar. So I'm going to start with you, Sam. Can you explain what non-recourse means?
Yeah, so basically, I guess what recourse is generally a personal guarantee, right? I guess I could relate it to someone's going to go and purchase a car. 9 times out of 10, they've got to use their personal credit report. So in this case with PACE, there's no personal guarantee. We just look at really the project itself, putting an assessment on the actual building itself, and therefore that allows it to be assumable, to the next project owner that may purchase it. And again, just looking at the actual LTV, the debt service coverage ratio, the cash flows of the actual, net operating income of the actual, asset itself. So it's a big deal in the commercial world because many owners, developers, right, don't necessarily, they would rather not have to, have a personal guarantee on these deals. There generally always is, though, especially new construction, some kind of construction guarantee that's different, right? Whether it's some kind of a bond or, coming from the general contractor, where the guarantee of the project will be actually constructed. But hopefully I answered that question.
Yeah, that's great. I'm going to stick with a couple of the more financing questions, and then we'll move to some of the technical questions. So is CPACE considered debt on a balance sheet?
That's a good question. And in general, yes. I should say that it really depends on who's looking, whether it's your accountant, some will qualify it as debt and others will not. And there are some lenders that will qualify it as equity, few and far between. But for the most part, it is it's an assessment, but it is a loan, right? That needs to be repaid. So I would say 80% of the time it is counted as debt, especially on the new construction side. But that is a I don't want to say an argument, but it is a debatable question that's ongoing.
Thanks, Sam. And one more question for you. Oh, go ahead, Marcel.
I was going to add to that because we ran this point very thoroughly through PricewaterhouseCoopers and Ernst & Young with clients that were considering these and big audit firms, and probably about 98% of the times that this question has gone in front of an auditor, it was considered on balance sheet debt. The PricewaterhouseCoopers position is that regardless of what it looks like, whether it's on-bill financing for a utility or whether it's PACE, as a tax being passed through, regardless of what it's being dressed as, it's the underlying structure that determines whether it's on or off balance sheet, and the fact that it's a fixed payment, that it's just the structure itself makes it on balance sheet.
Thanks. So one more for you, Sam, and then we'll go to Marcelo and Dan. So Leslie asked, she noticed the SIR on the brewery project had an SIR of less than 1. Can you discuss how that deal was structured?
Well, and that's a good question. And unfortunately, I wasn't actually part of this deal. This is predates me, so I can't elaborate on it. But I can certainly get back to the collective group of how it was structured. And I did see the SIR of it's close to 1 there. So I think we strive to be over 1. But I will certainly get back to the group on that.
Great, thanks. Okay, so let's start with Sean's question about UVGI light. What's the level of saturation required? Dan, you want to start with that?
Yeah, I was hoping you'd go to Stevie Wonder music, so I wouldn't have to answer that one. Yeah, I'm gonna have to call my engineers down the aisle here. What we generally do is we pick UV light based on wavelength, and that it's saturating the coil, saturating the airstream. It doesn't take a lot. Work with your vendor would be my answer to that. You have aspect ratios in ductwork. You have aspect ratios of your coils in the air handling units. And then also, if you do it in a space, which I didn't really talk about, but vestibules, elevator lobbies, places like that, where you can decontaminate surfaces, you really need to work with your vendors about making sure that the surfaces get properly treated.
Great, thanks. And then Dan, why don't you pick up this question, and then we'll pass it to Marcelo after you're done. In terms of, so I'm just going to read it out loud. Can you speak more about deploying new technology, i.e. bipolar ionization as a part of upgrading air filtering and HEPA? This person Michael has clients who are willing to try new tech and any and all COVID solutions. So can you just talk more about that?
Sure. What we do simply is present the facts, and their bipolar ionization manufacturers have their own research studies that are done, and you can take whatever position you want on that. But the client is spending the money, so they can take their position. We are putting it in buildings. Like I said, these clients are already doing the blocking and tackling of the fundamentals to get proper indoor air quality in their buildings. What you have to watch for in the bipolar ionization, and what the potential knock against it is that it can produce ozone, but so can UV light. But we've learned how to make UV light not produce ozone. And so, the potential concern would be you could be introducing ozone into a building. So you might, like I said before, the cure might be worse than the disease. However, we do have clients that are putting bipolar ionization in, and frankly, in the grand scheme of things, it's not very expensive. Now, I don't want to, belittle somebody spending 5 figures on something and saying that's not a lot of money. However, when you consider the capital upgrades that Sam was talking about, it's just a little portion of this. So I hope that answers that question. As opposed to upgrading existing filters and things like that, which is, you need to check your racks, the filter racks, and see what is acceptable, and check that against static pressure capabilities of your fans. So they're different processes. One mechanically grabs and filters out particles, the other turns them into something new.
Great. Marcelo, you want to add on to that?
Yeah, I've got a question for Dan, actually. You talked about MERV filtering and going from, the standard 8, MERV 8, and going to MERV 13. Now, I know that not all buildings have enough fan to do that. So not all mechanical systems can handle that level of filtration. So, for people out there that are watching this, how should they go about determining what MERV level their systems can take?
Well, you have to, send a technician or an engineer in to measure the filter rack depth. And, you know, generally you can take a MERV 13 filter any place that a MERV 8 can work, for sure.
I'm talking about the fan, having sufficient fan to be able to provide.
And it could be a problem on small terminal systems that have real limited capacity. Yeah. So we have done a few, you know, portable HEPA filtration units, those sorts of things. Anybody that has a child with asthma or you know, something like that, that does work. And also getting air change rates up. You can, in the pharmaceutical industry and sometimes in the hospital market, you also have booster fan filtration systems that are parallel to, not in series with, the existing HVAC. And so that's a way of getting your air change rates up and filtering the air more frequently. So we've been doing that in some facilities as well.
Great. So we have one more question in the Q&A and one in the chat. And I'm going to start with Sam Klein's question in the Q&A. So he asked, what efforts are underway to allow multifamily buildings into CPACE? So the answer to that is the sponsor of the original sponsor of CPACE in Pennsylvania in the Senate is currently drafting an amendment to the CPACE legislation, and later this year or early next year, the Philadelphia Energy Authority and Sustainable Energy Fund and KEA, the Keystone Energy Efficiency Alliance, and many other groups are going to start a campaign, an education campaign to get the Pennsylvania legislature to expand the definition of CPACE. And if you are interested in being part of those advocacy efforts, please send an email to cpace@philaenergy.org, and we'll get you on the list and let you know and when we need you to be activated. So that's cpace@phila, P-H-I-L-A, energy, I don't need to spell energy.org. And then we have a question from Michael Wong. Michael, thanks for this question. Is using real-time data on space utilization and building environmental data important to making these ventilation output adjustments? If so, what's an affordable solution to get building analytics? What metrics are the most important to drive decisions for operational changes from building analytics? And Michael, I know that you're working on some products out there that do these things. So thanks for asking that question, and we'll see what Marcelo and Dan have to say.
That's a big, broad question. I don't, you know, every building is unique, you know, and so, you know, we have some clients that have packaged rooftop units, single zone packaged rooftop units that are not going to be evaluating building analytics. And that's where I get back to the common sense type of question. But then you have major universities and extremely well endowed hospital systems that are mandated, frankly, to measure certain building analytics. How do you make it affordable? I'm not going to try to answer that in 1 minute. We'll have to pull that conversation offline. Maybe Marcelo has some ideas.
Well, that depends on your definition of affordable, I guess.
Perspective.
You know, there are analytics platforms in the market that do provide an overlay to building control systems to be able to take in data. Some of them, the better developed ones, can even actually provide a response and go back into the building and make adjustments through the BAS to how the building should be operating. So those systems are out there. You know, Ecosave does have a platform. We actually do the City of Philadelphia buildings. We won that contract. We do the Comcast towers. We do a whole bunch of buildings. You know, some buildings are 10,000 a year. The Comcast tower is 150,000 a year. So it depends on your definition of affordable.
Great. Do any of you have a question for each other or want to make one last comment before we wrap up?
I saw a good question. I think if I'm understanding it correctly, that's a common question in the ESCO world, and it translates over to CPACE. And that is, if you already have a building that isn't properly ventilated, how do you in essence, bring the ventilation up and and how do you create energy efficiency standards or projects when you're not burning enough energy? And the answer is pretty simple, that you can adjust the baseline, assuming that it's a fair statement, and everybody within CPACE structure is going to say, well, yes, the client is the building should be providing adequate indoor air quality to begin with. And so you can reestablish that baseline as if it's properly ventilated, and then apply your efficiency measures to that. So, if we say, well, it should be providing this ventilation air, what would the reestablished baseline of energy be? And then apply, well, we're going to add variable speed drives now, we're going to replace a chiller, put LED lights in, and we're getting the savings to investment ratio that you're looking for the project. Completely legitimate way of going about that.
So then I responded to that question in writing, and my comment there was that there still has to be a net savings in order for PACE to be able to be used. That if you just take that ventilation, that adjustment in baseline, if the net consumption of the building has still gone up regardless of the adjustment, that the PACE doesn't allow it, that you still need to combine it with other measures so that you have a net reduction regardless of the baseline adjustment.
Well, that's a great way to end this. I'm going to end by sharing contact information for all of us. You can take a moment to take this down. Also, we are going to be sharing the slides and the recording of this webinar on our website, and I'll be sending in a couple of days a link to that. And any other CPACE questions that you might have, you can go to our website at philadelphiacpace.org and or email cpace@philaenergy.org. So I want to thank Dan and Sam and Marcelo very much for your time this morning. And I want to also give a shout out to Morgan King, the intern who has made this webinar run so smoothly. So thank you very much, everybody, and have a good day.
Thank you.
Thank you.